Imagine two children. One has severe anemia despite taking enough iron, and the second develops curly brittle hair, delayed brain development, and weak bones. What if I told you the real problem is in both isn't iron, it's a copper? Yes, a trace element needed in only milligrams, but yet without it, your body cannot properly use iron, produce melanin, and strengthen collagen, or even generate cellular energy. Today, you will understand copper so conceptually that you will never have to memorize it again. Let's begin. Before we study copper, let me ask you a question. What do examiners repeatedly ask about the copper? Because copper beautifully connects the biochemistry, physiology, pathology, and medicine. Questions on the Wilson disease are Menkes disease, ceruloplasmin, iron metabolism, and copper dependent enzymes are among the favorite university questions. And clinically, understanding the copper helps explain why some patients have anemia, what doesn't improve with iron therapy, and why certain genetic disorders affect the liver, brain, hair, and bones simultaneously. So don't think of this just another trace element. Think of it as the mineral that quietly keeps multiple body systems running. Now let's first answer the most basic question: what is a copper? Copper is an essential trace element. The word trace simply means our body requires in very small quantities, but those small quantities are absolutely essential for life. Now, here's the interesting fact: the entire adult human body contains about 100 milligrams of copper. 100 milligrams, that's less than the weight of the small paper chip. Yet, without this tiny amount, iron metabolism fails, energy production decreases, connective tissue weakness, pigmentation changes, nervous system suffers, and this teaches us important principle in medicine. Importance is not determined by quantity. Hormones are present in micrograms, vitamins in milligrams, and copper in trace amounts, but their absence causes life-threatening diseases. Where copper found? Copper found in Is copper stored only in one organ? No. Copper is distributed throughout the body. However, the organs with high metabolic activity, especially liver, brain, and heart, kidneys, contains relatively more copper because they depend heavily on copper containing enzymes. So, if every organ contains copper, why do diseases like Wilson's mainly affect liver and brain? Don't worry, we will answer that later in today's lecture. Now let's discuss the daily requirement. Many students simply memorize the number instead of understand the logic. Adult requires approximately 2 to 3 milligrams per day, and children and infants require zero point 0.5 to 2 milligram per day depending on age. Why this requirement lower in children? Because they have smaller body mass. However, during periods of rapid growth, adequate copper intake becomes especially important because of bones, blood cells, connective tissues, and nervous system are developing rapidly. This is why nutritional deficiency during childhood has much more serious consequences than in adults. Now, naturally, the next question is the where do we get copper from? Look at this logically. Food rich in proteins and organ tissues usually contain more copper. So, excellent dietary sources include liver, kidney, meat, egg yolk, cereals, nuts, green leafy vegetables, and these are the rich sources for the copper. Milk is actually a poor source for the copper. It doesn't Many students assume milk contains every nutrient. It doesn't. Milk is rich in calcium and protein but not in copper. That's why infants who consume only milk for prolonged periods without adequate complementary foods, they may become susceptible to the copper deficiency. Can someone eating a balanced diet easily develop copper deficiency? Usually no, because copper is present in wide variety of foods. Most deficiency occurs due to problems with the absorption rather than the poor intake. And that brings us to next concept. Let's see about the absorption of the copper. Eating copper doesn't mean your body absorbs all of it. Only about 10% of dietary copper is actually absorbed immediately. Only 10%? Why so little? because the body carefully regulates copper. Too little is harmful and too much is toxic. So absorption gets tightly controlled. Where does absorption occurs? Mainly in the duodenum. Here, this is the first part of the small intestine and it is the major site where copper enters the body. Let's see the role of metallothionein. Now comes a protein whose name scares many students, metallothionein. Forget the complicated name. Here's understand its job. Think of metallothionein as a temporary storage and transport protein for the metals inside the intestinal cells. Here is the copper entering an airport. Metallothionein is an airport security officer. It catches copper, holds it safely, and regulates how much finally enters the bloodstream. That's why metallothionein facilitates and regulate the copper absorption. Now here's the favorite conceptual question, that can other minerals interfere with carbon absorption? Yes. Three important substances reduces the carbon uptake, that are the phytates, zinc and molybdenum. Why? Because they bind the copper or interfere with its transport, preventing efficient absorption. This is why excessive zinc supplementation over a long period can actually produce the copper deficiency. Let's discuss about the next part. Now we will know how copper enters the body. But here's the next big question. Once copper enters the bloodstream, does it flow freely? No. Once copper enters the bloodstream, it travels attached to a tiny, very important protein, that is ceruloplasmin. That's the single protein explains iron metabolism, anemia, and several university exam questions. Now we will know how carbon enters in the body. Normally, plasma copper concentration is approximately 100 to 200 milligram per dl. Don't worry about the number first. Understand the concept. When copper enters the bloodstream, it doesn't remain free. It immediately binds to protein. Why? Because free copper can produce harmful free radicals. These free radicals damage the proteins, DNA, and cell membranes. So, the body safely locks copper with the transport proteins. Think of the copper as dangerous but valuable chemical. You never transport petrol in open bucket. You carry it in sealed container. Similarly, the body carries the copper in the protein containers. Remember, ceruloplasmin is the main copper carrier. It is the one of the favorite university exam questions. Students often memorize the name but never understand its importance. Here is the concept. About 95% of plasma copper is tightly bound to ceruloplasmin. Only 5% is loosely bound to the albumin. Now ask, why does the body binds the copper so tightly? Because tightly bound copper is safe. It can travel through bloodstream without damaging tissues. Albumin bound copper is loosely attached, so it can be delivered to cells when needed. Now here's the something most students don't know, that the ceruloplasmin doesn't only transport the copper, it also acts as an enzyme. Its enzyme activity is called the peroxidase activity. Peroxidase activity. The name sounds difficult, let's simplify it. Iron exists in two important forms, that is ferric ion, Fe plus 3. Now here's the question, which form can bind efficiently to transferrin for transport in blood, Fe plus 2 or Fe plus 3? Answer is Fe plus 3. But after iron is absorbed from the intestine, much of it is in Fe plus 2 form. So who converts Fe plus 2 into Fe plus 3 is the ceruloplasmin. Fe plus 2 converted into Fe plus 3, it binds to, once become Fe plus 3, it binds to transferrin and major iron transport protein. And now transferrin safely carries iron through bloodstream to tissues like bone marrow, and the hemoglobin is produced. Now think carefully. If ceruloplasmin is deficient, Fe plus 2 cannot be efficiently converted to Fe plus 3. And if Fe plus 3 isn't formed, transferrin cannot transport iron properly. And then results, iron becomes trapped inside the tissues instead of reaching the bone marrow. Hence, this is why some patients don't improve simply by giving iron. The real problem is defective copper metabolism. That's the beautiful example for the how biochemistry explains the clinical medicine. Students often confuse these proteins. Let's clear the forever. Ceruloplasmin transport copper, transferrin transport Fe iron, and ceruloplasmin helps the iron change its form. Transferrin helps iron travel through the blood. Think of it like the relay race. Ceruloplasmin hands iron over to the transferrin. Let's discuss about the next part that so far we have learned how copper enters the body and how it travels in the blood. But now comes the most important question, why does our body need the copper at all? We will see the biochemical functions of the copper. If tomorrow all the copper disappeared from the body, what functions would stop? Energy production, hemoglobin synthesis, melanin formation, collagen formation, and even the brain would start malfunctioning. Let's understand every function one by one. The easiest way to understand copper is this: the copper doesn't perform reactions. Instead, it helps the enzymes to perform reactions. Think of copper as a battery inside the machine. Without the battery, machine is present, but it can't work. Similarly, many enzymes require copper to function. Examples include cytochrome oxidase catalase, tyrosinase, and dopamine beta hydroxylase. These names look difficult, don't memorize them now. Understand what each enzyme actually does. Next, we will see about the next function. Copper is essential for hemoglobin synthesis. Now, here is the beautiful concept. Many students think only iron is needed for the hemoglobin. That's incomplete. Copper is equally important. But why? Because copper allows iron to properly transported and utilized. Remember what we studied earlier, that ceruloplasmin converts the iron into transport form. Only then can bone marrow manufactures the hemoglobin efficiently. So copper deficiency causes anemia not because of the iron is absent, but because the iron cannot used properly. Whenever anemia doesn't respond to iron therapy, think about the copper deficiency. This is the favorite conceptual viva question. Let's connect today's concepts. Copper forms the important part of the ceruloplasmin, and ceruloplasmin has peroxidase activity. Fe plus 2 converts to Fe plus 3. This conversion allows the ion binding that bind to the transferrin. Without copper, ion transport becomes defective. This is one of the most frequently asked university questions. Now let me ask you something. What gives color to our skin? Melanin. But who helps to produce melanin? The enzyme called tyrosinase. Tyrosinase requires the copper. Imagine tyrosinase as a painter and copper is the paintbrush. Without the brush, painter cannot paint. Without copper, tyrosinase cannot produce enough melanin. Hence, skin becomes pale, hair loss is occur, and hair loss is the pigmentation. And this explains why copper deficiency can cause hypopigmentation. Tyrosinase loves the copper. No copper, no color, simply. Another important function, copper is essential for proper development of bones, nerves, and nervous system. But why? Because growing tissues require enzymes that depend on the copper. Bones need the strong collagen, nerves need the proper myelin and enzyme activity. Without copper, children develop delayed growth. Hence, weak bones, neurological abnormalities. This is exactly why Menkes disease produces severe developmental delay. Now imagine constructing a bridge. Would you simply place steel rods loosely? No. They must tightly connected. Similarly, collagen fibers inside our body also require strong crosslinks. And who creates these crosslinks? That created by the lysyl oxidase. And lysyl oxidase requires the copper. Next, we will see the function that here's one fun fact that humans use hemoglobin, but many invertebrates like octopus and crabs use hemocyanin. Instead of iron, hemocyanin contains copper. That's why their blood appears blue and when oxygenated. This is the commonly asked short viva question. And copper is stored in different tissues in different forms in liver, hepatocuprin, in brain, cerebrocuprin, and in RBCs, hemocuprin. Don't spend time memorizing these unless specifically required by your university exams. Imagine a patient comes to your OPD. He has anemia and weak bones, light colored hair, neurological problems. At a first glance, these symptoms seem completely unrelated. They all point toward the one mineral that is the copper. Let's understand each symptom one by one. Demineralization of bone, and then occurs fragility of arteries, myocardial fibrosis, graying of hairs, and their hypopigmentation, anemia, and demyelination of nervous system here occurs. Let's discuss about the Menkes disease. Now let's study one of the most important inherited disorder due to the defect in intestinal absorption of the copper. Here's the 6-month-old baby brought in pediatrician clinic, development delay and pale skin and depigmented hair. The doctor suspects the Menkes disease. Now the question is the why does this happen? The problem is in the lack of the copper in the food. The problem is the intestine cannot transport copper properly into the bloodstream. Problem is not a lack of copper in the food. As a result, copper becomes trapped inside the intestinal cells, and your notes mention that the metallothionein, which binds the copper inside the cells, the body cannot utilize that trapped copper effectively. So, even though copper enters the intestinal cells, it fails to reach the blood and tissues, and the body behaves as it's copper deficient. Let's discuss about the next disease, that is the Wilson's disease. It is the autosomal recessive inherited disorder. Don't memorize the first. Let's understand the story normally. Copper is absorbed from intestine. It reaches to the liver. Then inside the liver, copper has two possible pathways. It binds to ceruloplasmin and enters bloodstream, and excess copper excreted into the bile and leaves the body. Why does liver send copper into bile? Because copper is useful only in small amounts. Extra copper must be removed, otherwise, it becomes poisonous. Let's discuss what is occurring in the Wilson's disease. Where does excess copper go? Mainly four organs: liver, and liver is affected first, and copper damages liver cells. Patient may develop hepatitis, cirrhosis, and liver failure. Clinical pearl that whenever a young patient develops unexplained liver disease, always think about the Wilson's disease. Second one is the brain. Brain is next, and especially the basal ganglia. Why basal ganglia? Because these structures help to control the movement. Copper damages the neurons here, and patients develop tremors, muscle rigidity, difficulty in walking, and difficulty in speaking, and abnormal movements. And some psychiatric symptoms like mood changes, depression, personality changes, and behavioral abnormalities. This makes Wilson disease is fascinating disorder because it affects the both medicine and psychiatry. Third one is the cornea. Now comes one of the most famous exam question, that copper deposits in cornea. Specifically, this produces the famous Kaiser-Fisher ring. Draw a simple eye here, and here's the cornea. Here is the golden brown ring around your iris. This golden ring is one of the biggest clues to the Wilson's disease. Whenever examiners mention young patient neurological symptoms, liver disease, and golden round ring around the eye, immediately thinks the Wilson's disease. And next organ is the kidney. Copper may also accumulate in the kidneys. This occurs the renal tubule dysfunctions, and although less commonly asked than the liver and brain involvement. Let's discuss about the treatment of the Wilson's disease. What is the goal here? Simple, removes the excess copper. Here, penicillamine, it is the chelating agent. Imagine the copper as a dangerous criminal, but penicillamine acts as a police officer. It catches the copper and binds it and carries it out through urine. Simple. And that's exactly how chelation therapy works. Sometimes zinc is also used. Why? Because zinc decreases the intestinal copper absorption, less copper entering in the body, so less copper accumulates. Here we have discussed all about the copper and its deficiency, diseases, and RDA, and all the important points related to copper. In the next lecture, we will continue with another high yield biochemistry topic or another subject. See you there.